I want to show you a couple more things that you can do with functions when using SASS. We're going to be building a page that looks like this. It's very common that you might get your design of the page from a designer, and they may have laid out the page using Photoshop or some other photo editing application. And when you look at the values for the page, they're obviously using a fixed width layout. So you can see here, this page was designed at 1024 width. They wanted to have 60 of pixels on the right and the left. They wanted the main content to be about 904 pixels. And this first column is going to be 620 pixels, and this second column is going to be 284. Well, obviously, if you're building a page these days, you're going to want to be building it in a responsive way. So you can't just use these fixed values. Here's the page, and I have it built out using fixed values. You can see at a certain point when I resize the page, the layout doesn't work anymore. It jumps and it doesn't stay in its two-column manner. Now we probably want it to be in a one-column manner when it's sized down very small. But you can see here I have horizontal scroll bars, so this page is not built responsively at all. We're going to just be looking at the large screen layout, and we're going to look at ways that we can make this more flexible. For this page, I've built a really basic layout. I have a header with an H1. I have a main tag that contains an article and an aside. And then I have a div with a class of bar that contains another div. For this particular project, I just went ahead and created one SASS file instead of making the partials that we've been using in some of our previous exercises. This is just to make it a little bit easier, and since this page is a new layout, I wanted you to be able to easily see all of the elements that I'm using on my page. I start off by importing some Google fonts. I'm creating a variable called Ocean, which is setting the variable's value to this teal color. I have a universal selector that sets the box sizing to border box. I have some basic rules on the body tag, basic rules on the H1, the H2, the H3. On the main tag, I'm setting my margin to auto for the right and the left so that the content is centered, and I have some padding. Because I'm using floats, I'm using a pseudo class of after on main that will clear the floated values. Both the article and the aside are going to be floated. I also have some rules on the header, and I'm setting a height, I'm bringing in an image, I'm using background size cover, and setting the position to relative. For the article, you can see that my width is currently 620 pixels. This was picked up from the static design. I'm floating left, and I have padding set as 15 pixels. For the aside, my width is 284 pixels. I'm floating left. I have some margin settings here. I have a font size, a line height, padding, border, and I'm setting the text color of the aside to my teal ocean color. Then I have a rule on the aside H3, and I'm going ahead and using some negative margin settings to overcome the padding that I'm using on the aside. I wanted the bar that goes behind the H3 to fill this container, so that's why I'm using the negative margin settings there. I have some padding, setting the font color, and then finally I have a rule for my bar, and I'm setting its width to 100%, its height to 15 pixels, and I'm setting the background color to a darker teal. For the div that's a child of bar, I'm setting the width to 50%, the height will inherit from its parent, and the background color is going to be a lighter color teal. That's creating this element down below. We're going to be using some functions so that we can make this page more efficient. We're going to start off by, instead of using separate declarations for the color, we're simply going to use some of the color functions and use our ocean variable color to make these colors darker and lighter. I'll replace the hex value for the dark teal with a darken function, and then I'm just going to pass on my ocean variable. I'm going to tell this to darken by 20%. On the bar div, I'm going to do the same thing here, but we'll use the lighten. Let's see what these values look like. If we save this page and look in the browser, you can see that the colors have changed. Now I made them a little too dark and a little too light, so I can adjust those as necessary until I can dial this in and get my exact percentages that I want. I think for the lighten function, we're going to have to use a desaturate as well. So as you've seen before, you can nest functions. So I'm going to go ahead and use desaturate. I'll wrap the lighten inside the desaturate. And I'm going to go ahead and tell the new lightened version to desaturate by about 55%. Let's save this and look at it in the browser. That looks much better. As you can see, this is going to be more flexible because if I ever decide I want to change my color palette, I don't have to go in and change these colors. It's just going to automatically apply the color functions and update the page as necessary. The next thing that we're going to address is we're going to address the sizing. We want to make sure that when our page is resized, it's going to act in a responsive way and it's going to be flexible no matter what the width is. In order to do that, I'm going to use the built-in percentage function. So from our diagram, we know that the width of the first column should be 620 pixels, the width of the second column should be 284 pixels, and the overall width of the containing element is going to be 904. Knowing those numbers, we now have the mathematical formula to create a responsive layout. You've probably already heard of using target divided by context, which is going to give you the results. If we performed this mathematical calculation, we could find out what the percentage is going to be for the article and the aside. The number that we get is going to be a strange percentage-based number. Using SASS, we don't even have to worry about this. We can have SASS perform the calculations for us. I'm going to go ahead and use the percentage function. In the parentheses, I'll pass on the arguments, and the arguments are going to be 620 pixels divided by 904 pixels. We'll do the same thing down here for the aside. I'm going to pass on the percentage function. I'll wrap the arguments inside parentheses, and here we're going to divide 284 into 904 pixels. I just realized I misspelled percentage on the article, so let me add the R in there so this will work. Let's save the page and look at it in the browser. As you can see, the width of these items has now changed. Now, we still don't see the items side by side, and if we inspect right now, the problem is going to be that on the aside element, I have some extra margin. So as you can see, I added a 3% margin. What I really need to do is I need to take this width value, and you can see this is the percentage of the width, the calculation that's being performed by dividing 284 into 904. I need to also subtract 3%. Well, that's something that we can easily do in SASS as well. I'm going to go back to my SASS file, and here is the calculation that we've already performed. I'm simply going to add on minus 3%. If we save now and refresh in the browser, you can see that both of these columns are going to be side by side. And as I resize the page, they're going to flex and their percentage width is going to update based on the width of the overall page. As you can see, this is a very easy way that we can get the results that we want. The built-in SASS function called percentage is going to take the percentage of the two values and it'll allow us to pass on that value into our CSS. This is a great way that we can use our target divided into context to get the results. We don't have to figure out the math, and we can easily subtract on any extra margin or padding that might be affecting our overall layout. One other thing that I want to show you here that we don't necessarily have to do for this particular project, but it may be helpful in other things that you might be working on, is that I want to show you the round function. Currently, if we look at the width of either of these two columns, here's the article, you can see that the width value is 68.58407%. The aside also is kind of a more ugly number, 28.41593%. What we can do is, if you ever want these numbers to be whole numbers, you can simply wrap the calculation inside of the round function. So I'm simply going to add round and then wrap the percentage calculation, the arguments that I want to use, inside parentheses. If we save and we refresh, the layout itself is going to look very similar, but now you can see we're using whole numbers. The width of the aside becomes 28%. The width of the article is 69. And as I adjust the width of my overall page, those values are going to remain stationary. They're just going to be 28 and 69% of the overall width. If we add 69 and 28, we have the remaining 3%, which of course is the margin that's on the left-hand side of the aside. I generally don't like to use the round because I feel like the browsers are capable of calculating the exact precise number, but in some situations you might need to use round, so I did want to show it to you.